is Youth Sunday. And we had a very special time in Albuquerque. It was a combination of service projects and learning, which is very, very important. And personally, to me, the word mission, a mission trip, is very loaded. When you think of missionaries, you think of the missions and the Europeans and the colonizers that came to basically take over land that didn't belong to them. So I really enjoyed this past week because it was a service project mixed with learning, and they got to learn about how their faith ties into social justice, and particularly for this trip, it was focused on the indigenous people in New Mexico and the communities there. So one of the things that we learned was about the Doctrine of Discovery, which Aileen will talk about a little bit later. So we thought we would start today with a land acknowledging that this land is the land of the Kumeyaay people. Go ahead, Cesareo.
We here at University Christian Church recognize that our land, the land our buildings occupy the unceded Kumeyaay land. The Kumeyaay, who came to be known as the indigenous in Spanish, have lived on this land for over 10,000 years in the mountains, valleys, and coastal regions. We commit ourselves to caring for this land and its inhabitants in honor of the Kumeyaay people, and always in the spirit of stewardship, openness, and caring of our land and neighbor.
All right, thank you.
A reading from the Gospel of Luke. Hear what God's Spirit is saying to you. A legal expert stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he said, "what must I do to gain eternal life?" Jesus replied, "What is written in the law? How do you interpret it?" He responded, "You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your being, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." Jesus said to him, "You have answered correctly. Do this and you will live." But the legal expert wanted to prove that he was right, so he said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus replied, "A man went down to Jerusalem to Jericho. He encountered thieves who stripped him naked, beat him up, and left him near death. Now it just so happened that a priest was also going down the same road. When he saw the injured man, he crossed over to the other side of the road and went on his way. Likewise, a Levite came by that spot, saw the injured man, and crossed over to the other side of the road and went on his way. A Samaritan who was on a journey came to where the man was, but when he saw him, he was moved with compassion. The Samaritan went to him and bandaged his wounds, tending them with oil and wine. Then he placed the wounded man in his own donkey, took him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day, he took 2 full days' worth of wages and gave them to the innkeeper. He said, "Take care of him, and when I return, I will pay you back for any additional costs." What do you think, which one of these 3 was a neighbor to the man who encountered thieves? Then the legal expert said, "The one who showed compassion to him." Jesus told him, "Go and do the same."
So today, instead of a sermon, our youth will be sharing a little bit about their week and what they learned. First up, we have Gabe.
Hello.
Gabe, where did we go this week?
We went to Albuquerque, New Mexico.
How was the trip?
Yeah, it was cool. No, I'm kidding. It was really fun. It was really fun. I loved it. I'm sure we all loved it.
Yeah.
Going to Albuquerque. It was really hot.
It was very hot and very dry.
Yeah.
So tell them a little bit of what we did. What was the week like?
Give me a second. Pretty much we went to a church. We stayed at a church. Obviously went to Albuquerque. We stayed with another group from the College Station, Texas. And we learned about indigenous people throughout the whole time. We helped out people in need, which they'll be explaining here in a minute.
Yeah, and what did we do for fun?
We throwing balls around in the
That's true.
in our sleeping area as hard as we can. And then we also visited locations from Stranger Things, because Stranger Things was filmed in Albuquerque.
Yep.
And it was really cool.
It was.
And I enjoyed it.
Aww.
We all enjoyed it.
Thank you,
Really,
Gabe.
really cool.
We appreciate that. So first up, to share about our service projects, we have Ariana, who will share about our very first day of service.
So on the first day, we went to Mandy's farm. Mandy's farm helps people with developmental disabilities by teaching them how to ride horses, garden. They can feed animals, anything that they want, I guess, that on the farm, and they live on the farm for however long they want, and they help out. What we did is we split into two groups. One group helped organize a classroom that the staff works in, because they're way too busy trying to help with the animals and everything. And then the other group cleaned off saddles and organized them and cleaned off boots and stuff. And then we got to see they had 4 dogs, super cute, and then cats, horses, ponies, baby goats were really fun. There was a quail, very loud but cute. And then there was a goose that we called Megamine because I guess had a lump on his face, but it was cute. Something that stood out to me is how they help people with disabilities, and especially making a therapeutic pool for them, which helps in many ways. There's no chlorine in it, so they can go underwater and open their eyes. There's no strong smell of the chlorine. One of the main reasons is most of the times at pools, they have a chair that helps people get into the pools, but they're always broken and they never fix it. But with this pool, they can get into the water, and the pool's not that loud, so they can be calm and comfortable, and there's not people splashing around and stuff. But yeah, that was it.
Yeah, thank you, Ari. Next up, we have Lupita, who will be sharing about our work at an organization called Serenam.
Yeah. This Serenam was it was one part was a house where they do most of the stuff, and they own apartments on the other side. We split up in 2 groups. The men, the guys, they were staining a fence because they're gonna fix the fence. Then the rest of us, we went on the other side where the apartments were, and we were repainting, cleaning up, little games like hopscotch and the other stuff I didn't know of. While we were there was over 20 apartments where they help families in need or homeless families. They help them stay there for at least 2 years until they get back on their feet. Then they move out. Then they get more people. Something that stood out to me was let me see. I just like how they help families, because most of the families are single mothers or fathers, and how they just help them. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lupita. And I am going to share really quickly about Roadrunner Food Bank. So the same day that we went to Serenam, that afternoon we went to Roadrunner Food Bank, which is the largest food bank in New Mexico, and they distribute food throughout all of New Mexico. Our job there was to take fresh produce that grocery stores donate to the food bank and sort through it. So, oh, I do have my mic on. That we sorted through the produce, and I will actually make a video. It was my goal to make a video for today, but I have my limits, and I was very tired. So I will share a video with you all in the epistle and next week during the service, so that you can see just how much food we ended up having to throw away because it was starting to go rotten or was already rotten. But it's leftover groceries, produce that the grocery stores cannot sell, or they know that they cannot sell, or just have received too much. They donate it to the food bank. Our job was to sort through all of it, the berries, avocados, mangoes, broccoli, carrots, lettuce, all sorts of stuff. And we had a huge bin that was empty. We actually had 3 huge bins that were empty when we got there. And as we sorted through it, by the time we left, all 3 bins were full. We were there for 2 hours. Yeah, discarded bins. We kept, the produce we could use, we set aside, but the discarded produce filled up the bins. And every single one of our teens, Aileen and myself, we were all very moved by, negatively moved, not positively, by the amount of waste from that food. We are a very consumeristic society. We always want the produce that looks great, even though we know that the produce that might have imperfections is still as usable. And that's what the grocery stores discard oftentimes. Every single one of them talked about how emotional it made them feel to see how much waste we have. And hopefully that's something that we will take with us into the future, which is to be more mindful of what we bring home, to make sure that we're not wasting, to be more mindful of the choices we make when we are buying produce, hopefully buying locally, because we know that transporting fruits and vegetables across the world and across the country also contributes to an immense amount of waste. So that was a very great experience for all of us, and even us adults. So that was Roadrunner Food Bank. And next up, we have Alyssa Wallace, who will share about our last service project. I think you need to turn it on.
We went to Rio Grande Food Bank on the 3rd day, and what they do is they distribute food to people in need, and there's just a huge line of cars waiting to get their food. What we did there is we cleaned up the garden by picking weeds, and we harvested basil, and the basil got handed out to the people. And one thing that stood out to me was how long the line of cars was and how quickly it went to 2 cars.
That's true. The volunteers, they had a great volunteer base. And last, we will have Aileen Samora share with us. I am very grateful to Aileen, who gave up a week of her life to join the teenagers. As we know, it is not easy to work with young folks sometimes. Y'all are beautiful, but you have a lot of energy. And I have a hard time keeping up. But she gave up a week, and she was so quick to respond when I sent her a text and just said, hey, how about coming to New Mexico with me for a week with the teens? She responded within a minute and said yes. So I am so grateful to her. To put this into context as well, we all slept on the floor, which we know. Even just one night of sleeping on the floor is sometimes very difficult, but she slept on the floor. She dealt with, the teens stay up really late and, lack of sleep. So thank you, Aileen. And I will let her share.
So as the youth have summarized, and you've noticed, our youth trip to Albuquerque last week consisted of very full days. I mean, getting up at before 7 a.m. in order to have breakfast, and then moving out, driving to wherever social service agency we were going to in order to do a variety of work. And as you heard, I mean, it was everything from pulling weeds to, cleaning out rooms or tack rooms or offices that hadn't been cleaned in years. And what was most enjoyable, though, was to see them willing to just jump in and do the work, whether, no matter how hard it was or how unusual it was, they just went at it. And at the end of their work hours, it was such a joy to see them excited about what they had accomplished. And hear them reflect on what they had learned, as you heard Marcella talk about their reflections on the food bank. And during our evening sessions and our visits to the Pueblo Indian Cultural Center and the historic site of the Jemez Pueblo people, the focus was on learning about the ways of the indigenous people and how they have been affected in the Americas how they have not been treated as our neighbors in a neighborly fashion as the Bible teaches us. Rather, we learned about the Doctrine of Discovery. How many of you know about the Doctrine of Discovery? Raise your hands. Okay. All right. The Doctrine of Discovery was a church mandate by the Catholic Church back when actually both Spain and Portugal made the statement that the New World, the Americas, were not inhabited by people who were European and Christian, therefore they were not actually human beings. And so that gave the explorers the right to eliminate them. Just like you would eliminate the ants or vermin that are in your house because they are occupying your house and are a nuisance, it gave them the right to exterminate the indigenous people. So they either purchased the land from them for pennies pennies or beads or whatever, and as one way of getting the land. And if the native people refused to sell, then there was war and they were massacred. And that was the other way to gain the land. And so this morning when we talked about when Cesario read the, now I forgot what it's called, the land acknowledgement that the Kumeyaay people own, this was their land, all of the San Diego area, and yet it was stolen from them, and we are all reaping the rewards. So that was one of the things that they learned. They also learned about Indian boarding schools, where the children of the indigenous people were removed and moved, hundreds, even thousands of miles away from their families as an effort to get the Indian out of them. And so they were not allowed to speak their languages. Their hair was cut. They were forced to, and hair is very a spiritual part of the Native Americans. And so to have them taken away now, we find, even in this century, for example, that with the Kumeyaay, only a very small percentage still speak their language. Because when the children came back as adults and so forth, they knew nothing of their culture or of their language. And this idea of the Doctrine of Discovery continues because, and I'm giving you a specific example that came up just in the last week, maybe you heard about it, but the Kumeyaay wanted to have their language taught in their own schools. And so they brought in linguists to listen to the elders who had learned knew the language in order to be able to get all of the structures and the words and so forth, so that they could be taught to the children. They could create a book, a language book, a Kumeyaay language book. However, when it came to the book being released, the linguist and the publishers said they would only sell it back to the Kumeyaay. And the Kumeyaay are saying, but it's our language. But they said, well, we did the work. So you can see that this continues, this situation continues, the results of the Doctrine of Discovery continues even into this day. Another thing that they learned about was the suppression of native spirituality by the Christian church and at large. And so we learned that, and that's why I used the prayers of different indigenous peoples to see that, who we call God the Father, they call the Great Spirit, depending on which tribe you are in. And you heard the prayers are the prayers that we would pray. And so it gives us that connection. So after these different learning experiences, in our small groups, we discuss the ways in which each of us has been affected by what has happened, and how we can be the neighbor to the indigenous peoples in our communities, which is now something that we can continue from this point on. And then following small group, as Gabe was saying, the excessive energy, nice way of putting it, the excessive energy of the teens was released. It's like release the Kraken, okay. And they played, they laughed, they shouted, and engaged in endless games of Uno, right? Until lights out and beyond. And the next day, they were ready to do it all again. Marcella and I may not have been ready to do it all again, but they were ready to do it all again. So it was just an amazing time for all of us. Thank you.
We're going to end in a few minutes, or another minute. I just wanted to share thank you to everybody who made this trip possible. Especially right now when things are so expensive, a trip like this is not cheap, but it is so worth it. Investing in the lives of our youth is more than worth it. And I know that this trip will have will have a long-term impact on their lives. I am hopeful that next year we can go with the same organization, Reach Beyond Mission, to Washington, D.C. That is my hope. We had signed up for the D.C. trip in 2019 to go in 2020, but we all know what happened in 2020, so it wasn't possible. This was our first trip with Reach Beyond Mission, and as somebody who grew up on mission trips, that oftentimes had a very white savior complex, let's go and teach the people and do all this good stuff and then leave. This trip was very significant for me because Reach Beyond Mission doesn't focus on just, the mission. They focus on partnering with organizations that have had a long-term impact in the communities that they serve and that will continue to have an impact on the communities that they serve. But they also want the youth to learn about, like Aileen said, the Doctrine of Discovery and all the systemic injustices and climate change and food crisis and all these important things from a faith perspective, which is really amazing. So hopefully we can go to Washington, D.C. next year. Thank you again to all who made this trip possible. Lupita's gonna close out the service with a litany of love.
Every morning before we went out to serve, we would read the following litany of love. Please join us. I will begin. No.
It's okay. Okay, go ahead.
In a world that tells us to love our money and possessions, we will listen to these words.
Love God with all your heart and soul and mind.
In the world that wants us to hate the other, we will listen to these words.
Love your neighbor as you love yourself.
In the world that radicalizes, we too will be radical
with our hospitality, radical with our hope, radical with our love.
In this world God made, we are ready to be who we are called to be.
We are called to be the neighbor. Amen.